The distress signal was real. The serial number was real. The problem was that the beacon's owner had already been missing for a decade. When the alert came into our search and rescue station, nobody treated it as an emergency at first. Beacons malfunction, registration records contain mistakes, and lost equipment has a habit of turning up long after people stop looking for it. At the time, there seemed to be plenty of reasonable explanations. What made everyone uneasy was the location. The signal was coming from a restricted peak near the northern boundary of the range, a place known for unstable weather, frequent whiteouts, and terrain dangerous enough that most rescue teams avoided it unless there was no other option. According to the records, it was also the exact place where a solo hiker had disappeared 10 years earlier without leaving behind a single trace. As the storm moved in and the beacon continued transmitting, we were sent up the mountain to retrieve what we assumed was an old piece of equipment. At the time, none of us expected to find anything unusual. We certainly didn't expect the mountain to give us something back. I had been with search and rescue for a little over 8 years when this happened. Long enough to know that most strange situations eventually have ordinary explanations. Equipment may fail, coordinates might be entered wrongly, and lost gear can reappear years later. The wilderness creates mysteries that often disappear the moment you get close enough to examine them. That was exactly how we viewed the distress signal that morning. Dispatch had verified the beacon registration multiple times before contacting our team. Each search returned the same result. The beacon belonged to Daniel Mercer, a hiker who had disappeared on the mountain 10 years earlier. His case was still remembered locally because of how thoroughly it had been investigated. Search teams had spent weeks combing the area. Helicopters had flown repeated passes over the ridge lines, and volunteers had searched countless miles of terrain. Despite all of that effort, nothing connected to Mercer had ever been found. What made the situation difficult to ignore was the signal's location. The beacon wasn't transmitting from somewhere lower on the mountain, where shifting snow or erosion might have exposed old equipment. It was coming from a restricted section near the summit, an area known for unstable weather and dangerous conditions. When the new coordinates were compared to the original case file, they matched almost exactly with the location where Mercer had last been seen. Nobody immediately assumed something impossible was happening. Most of us believed there had to be a reasonable explanation. The leading theory was that the beacon had somehow remained buried for years and had recently become exposed. Another possibility was that someone had recovered it long ago and accidentally activated it. Even so, there was an uncomfortable feeling in the room that nobody could quite explain. The weather forecast added pressure to the decision. A winter storm was already moving across the range, and conditions near the summit were expected to deteriorate rapidly by late afternoon. If we wanted answers, we needed to move before the mountain became inaccessible. A 4-person team was assembled, and shortly before noon, we began the climb. The lower slopes were manageable, but conditions worsened steadily as we gained elevation. Snowfall increased, visibility narrowed, and the wind became strong enough to erase our tracks within minutes. Through it all, the beacon signal remained unusually consistent. Every time we checked our equipment, the distance reading decreased with almost perfect accuracy. On terrain this rugged, that wasn't normal. As the storm closed in around us, we eventually reached a broad shelf of wind-packed snow just below the summit. Our tracking equipment indicated the beacon was only a few yards away. We spread out and began probing the surface, expecting to uncover an old piece of gear. Then, one of the team members called out. Beneath the snow, a faint red light was flashing. The beacon was still transmitting. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The beacon wasn't lying on the surface where shifting snow or wind might have exposed it. It was buried beneath fresh accumulation, deep enough that we should never have seen the light through the snow. Yet the indicator continued blinking with the same steady rhythm our equipment had tracked throughout the climb. One of the team members knelt beside it and began clearing the area with an avalanche shovel, while the rest of us watched the weather deteriorate around us. We had expected to recover an old piece of equipment, document it, and head back down before the storm became dangerous. Instead, the deeper we dug, the stranger the situation became. The first thing I noticed was moisture. When I brushed away some of the snow surrounding the beacon, the surface beneath felt damp. Another member of the team noticed it almost immediately. As we widened the excavation, we discovered a circular area several feet across where the snow was noticeably softer than everything surrounding it. That didn't make much sense. The temperature was well below freezing, and conditions were getting worse by the minute. Yet, the deeper we dug, the more obvious it became that heat was rising from somewhere beneath the snowpack. Small pockets of meltwater collected near the bottom of the hole, while everything around us remained frozen solid. Visibility had fallen so much that looking beyond the excavation felt like staring into a wall of white. Despite that, nobody seemed eager to leave. The warmth beneath the snow bothered us more than the beacon itself. Equipment fails all the time. Heat sources don't simply appear near the summit of a frozen mountain. When we finally recovered the beacon, the serial number matched the registration records exactly. We were holding the same locator beacon that belonged to Daniel Mercer, the hiker who had disappeared 10 years earlier. At that point, we had a choice to make. The storm was getting worse. We had accomplished our original objective, and yet the source of the heat remained unexplained. I'm curious what you would have done. Do you keep digging? Or do you leave immediately and come back when conditions improve? Let me know in the comments. Our team chose to keep digging. The decision wasn't unanimous, but curiosity won. We expanded the excavation and began probing beneath the softened layer of snow and ice. For several minutes, we found nothing except more evidence of warmth rising from below. Then, one of the probes suddenly dropped much farther than expected. We tested the area again from several angles, and each time, the probe encountered empty space beneath the ice. Whatever was producing the heat wasn't buried in the snowpack. It was coming from somewhere below it. Working carefully, we removed more snow until a narrow opening began to emerge. A faint current of warmer air drifted upward from the darkness. I remember kneeling at the edge and shining my flashlight down through the gap. Below us was a chamber hidden beneath the mountain, and from what little we could see through the opening, it didn't appear to be a natural formation. The opening wasn't large enough for anyone to enter safely, but it was obvious we weren't looking at a natural pocket formed by shifting snow. Warm air continued drifting upward through the gap, and even with the storm building around us, nobody seemed eager to leave. We had climbed all day to investigate a beacon that shouldn't have been active, and now we were staring into a hidden chamber beneath the mountain. We widened the opening enough to lower lights and get a better look inside. The chamber wasn't particularly large, but parts of it disappeared beyond our lights. What caught my attention wasn't its size. It was the evidence that someone had occupied it. We could see scraps of fabric, melted candle stubs, and what appeared to be old food packaging scattered across the floor. None of it looked recent, but none of it looked old enough to have been sitting untouched for a decade beneath a sealed layer of snow and ice. The discovery immediately created another problem. The opening we had uncovered had been completely buried before we arrived, and there was no obvious secondary entrance visible from our position. One member of the team suggested there might be another passage somewhere deeper inside the mountain, but that theory only raised more questions than it answered. While part of the team continued examining the chamber, another member focused on documenting the recovered beacon. A few minutes later, he called us over, and the expression on his face told me something was wrong. He had opened the battery compartment. At first, I assumed the batteries had fallen out during recovery, but a closer inspection ruled that out. The compartment wasn't damaged, there was no corrosion, and there was no sign that a battery had ever been inside it. We checked the beacon repeatedly, expecting to discover something we had overlooked, but the conclusion never changed. Somehow, we had followed an active distress signal to a beacon with no apparent power source. That discovery changed the mood more than anything else we found on the mountain. Up until then, everyone had assumed there was a reasonable explanation waiting to be uncovered. The empty battery compartment didn't prove that anything impossible had happened, but it eliminated the explanation we had considered most likely. By that point, conditions on the summit had deteriorated enough that staying any longer was becoming difficult to justify. We finished documenting the site, secured the beacon, and began preparing for the descent while snow continued blowing across the opening. As we packed our equipment, one of the radios emitted a brief burst of static. Nobody paid much attention at first. Communication had been unreliable for most of the afternoon. What caught my attention instead was the reaction of the team member carrying one of the locator receivers. He looked down at the screen, paused, and then held it up for the rest of us to see. The receiver was detecting a beacon signal. At first, I assumed it was picking up the recovered locator beacon. That explanation stopped making sense almost immediately. The beacon had already been secured, and we had just confirmed that the battery compartment was empty. To be certain, one of the team members removed it from his pack and placed it in the snow while we watched the receiver. The signal remained active. More troubling was the direction indicator. Instead of pointing toward the recovered beacon, it pointed back toward the opening beneath the ice. We checked the reading repeatedly, expecting it to correct itself, but every update produced the same result. According to the receiver, the signal wasn't from the beacon we had recovered. It was coming from somewhere deeper inside the mountain. The storm was worsening, daylight was fading, and whatever was generating that signal wasn't something we were prepared to investigate under those conditions. We gathered our equipment, took one final look at the opening beneath the ice, and started down the mountain. The storm closed the mountain less than 24 hours later. By the time conditions improved enough for another team to return, an avalanche had swept across the summit. The opening we had uncovered was gone. Tons of snow and ice had buried the area, and despite several attempts over the following months, no one was ever able to locate the chamber. As far as the official record is concerned, the investigation never produced any answers. Daniel Mercer was never found. No secondary beacon was recovered. No explanation was found for the heat source beneath the ice, and no one could explain how the recovered locator beacon transmitted a signal without a battery. Over the years, I've considered every reasonable possibility I can think of. Equipment failure, human error, some detail we overlooked in deteriorating conditions. The problem is that none of those explanations account for everything we encountered that day. What stays with me most isn't the chamber, or even the beacon. It's the fact that, during the first part of our descent, the locator receiver continued to detect the same signal at irregular intervals behind us. Every time we stopped to check, the source appeared to be somewhere higher on the mountain, somewhere near the place where we'd found the chamber. Watching from somewhere dark and quiet tonight? Drop where you're watching from below. And if these stories stay with you, consider subscribing. Some places don't let you leave completely.